Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for our conversation tonight, the open table conversation, and we're talking about church in the digital age. So glad you could join us. Just keeping an eye on our page here. So yeah, thanks for taking some time to be with us. It's a miserable old evening. I mean, what are you going to do anyways besides be inside and listen to a conversation about church in the digital age? So I want to just introduce our panelists real quickly. Not going to go into a big lot of detail because we did that very creatively already on the Facebook page. So everybody should have some idea of who we are. But my name is Rob Cook and I'm rector here at St. Mark's. We've got Joanne Mercer with us as well, all the way from Twillingate, where reports are that it was snowing earlier. Yuck. Ick. We've got Jonathan Rowe, Miriam Bowlby, John Hilliard, and Kendallin Mazer. Got your name right, didn't I? Yes. So we're here to talk about church in the digital age. I don't know if you know this, but we're in the middle of a global pandemic where we can't really gather in our regular public spaces in our churches for worship or any of the other things that churches do, like Christian education. And so that's really forced us more so than ever to go online. And so that's why we're talking about this digital age. But the digital age is really nothing new. We've been in the digital age for quite some time now, really with the advent of the PC, the personal computer, and the internet. That really ushered in the digital age or the information age. And that really picked up steam as the internet became more widely used and people started to use tools like the internet and email to communicate with each other. And then that became even more predominant in our lives with the advent of something called the smartphone, the iPhone, and other kinds of smart devices like that. And then with social media, we were even more interconnected through the internet, and the sharing of information became even more easy and convenient. And so more and more of our lives has moved online. More and more of our communications is now digital. Even our economics, our entertainment, everything now is digital. You're hard pressed sometimes to find a physical copy of a piece of music or a film. Most of our books now are online. Everything has become digital. But it feels like to me, and I'm sure everybody would agree with this to a certain extent, that the church has been rather slow to embrace this digital shift. And it's only with the pandemic now that has really forced our hand, that has made us move more into the digital world. And so since the pandemic has started, you've seen more churches streaming Sunday worship, doing more Christian education through things like Zoom and Facebook Live, YouTube Live. More and more of our church life is now moving online as well. And so this has been going on now 7 weeks. I think we're into the pandemic now. So 7 weeks. And so some of the conversations that I've been having and that some of us here have been having together have been about, some critical reflection now. On the first couple of weeks, it felt like we were just trying to keep our heads above water, just trying to, establish some kind of presence in the digital church. And so now I think it feels like now it's time to start some more deeper conversations about what we're doing. Is it working? What could we do better? What's our goals in trying to be present in a more digital kind of way? And there's all kinds of theological questions that get raised when we start talking about digital church. So that's what we're going to try and do tonight. We're probably only just going to scratch the surface, and hopefully the conversation will continue. People who are watching through Facebook Live, if you're watching live or if you're watching this afterwards, please feel free to post any comments or questions. and we'll try our best to get to some of them. Can't promise we'll get to all of them. But part of the conversation is not just what we're going to say here, but what you're going to bring to the conversation as well. So to get things going, the first question that I want, and we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes to just speak to this question before we start into more of a free-for-all. The first question is, what opportunities do you see for digital church? Like what are some good things, some possibilities that the digital church presents to us? Maybe Joanne, we could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the opportunities are only limited by your imagination and your willingness to be daring. I think that we're outside of the building. Like, you know, we've often had that phrase, you know, that Jesus left a building, the church has left a building, or whatever. So I think for me, one of the amazing opportunities is to sort of see what's possible. So if we're not confined by our normal liturgies, we can keep sort of the regular order, but like what else can we do in this space? How can we include people? How can we weave things together differently? How can we be responsive and be seen to be responsive and to be hearing people? How can we do that? How can we include more people who haven't been included? You know, I think it's sort of like you, like we sort of I started initially just trying to do what I always did and provide something for folk to keep them going. But the longer this goes, I think the more and more opportunities I see, the more I realize that, yeah, the things that we sort of have talked about as in theory for years are possible. And that really you don't need an incredible amount of technology or skills. You just need to be really, really determined and stubborn. Like, I'm going to figure out how to do that. And I'm going to, you know, and I'm going to do that. So I think it's opportunities to reach folk, opportunities to be responsive and speak into people's needs, opportunities to exercise our creativity, and to be daring in ways that you haven't been before.
Yeah, it's been really, you know, and for myself personally, the learning curve has been pretty steep, and I feel like I'm learning new things every day, and sometimes multiple new things a day. And but it's also been really fun to watch some of my colleagues find their way into the digital age too. And God bless them for, you know, putting themselves out there, because it takes a lot of like vulnerability and guts, I think, to step out like that. So yeah. Jonathan, how about you?
I mean, there are a couple of things that are really obvious. I mean, there's the obvious examples of we can connect now with former parishioners, former members of the congregation who used to be here, but now they've moved away. I've got a number of people who have been, you know, who've been reconnected with St. Michael's because we're online, and now they can do, you know, they can connect with us through Facebook, through all that kind of thing. They always could, but they have a better sense of sort of the community that they used to belong to. They're still kind of tied into that, and they're worshiping with us on Sunday mornings, and that's really cool. There's a greater opportunity for some even older parishioners who are not going to be able to get out to church because they have medical issues, and getting up Sunday morning is a difficult thing. It's it's stuff that we want to do in the evening. They don't have to drive after dark to go to be doing things online. One of the things that I was going to say, and I think that it kind of, you know, that it dovetails into what you were talking about with the vulnerability. As clergy, we put on a really good show of having everything all together, having our act together. We got a polished thing that's going on. I think there's something that's really remarkable when, especially when we're doing this in this particular context. A lot of us are streaming services from our homes. We're connecting where people are seeing behind the curtain. And there's a human side of things that people don't ordinarily get to see. I love to tell a story of there's a colleague of mine in Toronto, in Ontario. She's just outside of Guelph, and she had started just at the beginning of Lent, even before the pandemic had started. She had started live streaming services from, no, she was actually pre-recording, and she was broadcasting services of morning prayer, every day with her, with her congregation. And a couple of days into the pandemic, her phone was on a brand new little phone tripod that she had, and she realized it was a whole lot less stable like that than the previous setup. And the camera, boom, fell down under the bed. And she was just, and seeing that, that sort of look of horror on her face, she said, "Oh my gosh," she said, and she picked up, she said, "Are you all right? Is it okay?" And I'm like, no, it's okay. I didn't get hurt. Is your phone okay? That's but the way that she sort of recovered with that with such grace. I thought, if that was me, first of all, I might have actually sworn and had to say, "I'm sorry, that was really really unprofessional." But giving people that chance to kind of see, to see that the clergy, yeah, we're normal people. I kind of clean up in the background when I'm broadcasting from the house, but our house kind of looks as much of a pigsty as anybody else's does sometimes, and that's important to see. That's it makes us more real, makes us more authentic.
Yeah, I know myself, the first few weeks of the Sunday, live stream for church, I was really tense, really anxious, and I was more worried about it being perfect than if it was like just in-person church. I'm pretty relaxed when it comes to church. If we kind of go with the flow, but I found myself the first few weeks, I was so tense. And it took about the fourth Sunday before I said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to be myself and try to, let my personality come across and capture some of the personality that we have really here at St. Mark's. But I was putting so much pressure on myself for it to be perfect. And I don't know why, because I don't put that same pressure on myself when it's just in-person church, right? Miriam, what do you think are some of the opportunities for us in digital church?
Oh, I think there's so many. Like, beyond reconnecting with people who've been away from the church, there's people who may never walk through your doors, but all of a sudden you're in this new platform and you are on Facebook or YouTube, and it's accessible, and it's like peering into the church without actually having to make the bold move of walking up the steps. And I find that kind of exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunities there for people to explore faith, explore the good news, and hear it in a way that's accessible to them in that moment. I just think I'm kind of excited by it. Now I'm starting to think, okay, we got to get through the pandemic. But after the pandemic, we have to keep figuring out how to keep our kind of digital congregations with us. So we can't go back to how we were before. So and for me too, learning lots of new skills, like all the time. Like, I've never spent so much time looking at myself in a video camera, like
I know.
or re-recording things because I go, oh, that was dumb. Delete. My poor phone is all I have to say.
That's the thing with live, right? You just you do it, and if you goof, you just pretend you didn't goof and keep going. Because if I had to do things, pre-record things, it would take me all day, because I would just not be happy with anything. Like, it's better to just do it. Just put it out there, foibles and all, and just
Go for it. I do two things. So I do Worship Wednesdays, which is pre-recorded, and then Sunday morning is live. So I got a little mix of both.
Yeah. John, what about you? What do you think?
So it's interesting because we've been watching a lot of, I've been seeing a couple of different ways that this is unfolding, right? You see some churches, like, for example, the church that I attend, they haven't been trying to recreate the service in a digital aspect. What they've been doing is more focused on community. So this week they asked a bunch of people to send video clips of their children. So they did like a whole montage thing to connect with community kids, right? And the kids could see themselves on the church website and on the Facebook broadcast, which I thought is great. So it's interesting because for church leaders, I think it's important to understand that there's no requirement to do it live or to do the pre-recorded production. Just do in whatever way you're most comfortable. Because once again, as you know, with me, in the moment, you're going to get what you're going to get. Depending on how much you stoke the fire, you're going to get more flames, right? But
Poke.
yeah, just poke. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there's an authenticity that can come across from getting like a little more up close and personal, if it can be conveyed properly, that maybe you're not getting in a church that's a bigger physical space, right? And then the other side of it too, that, you know, same as what we were discussing earlier, is this idea of like, I'm a big fan of people sort of, which is hilarious coming from evangelical roots, but I'm a big fan of people being able to passively sort of invite Jesus into their lives. And so with a pre-recorded option, they can do that at their own pace, right? You know, with the podcast that you were so lovingly to come on and have a chat with me,
Let's not speak
and get a reprimand afterwards for your colorful language. But the interesting part about that is that there's an authenticity there. And yeah, it's long form, you know, they're an hour long, but people can unpack those at 10 and 15 minutes over weeks, if that's the journey that they're on, right? And so I'm a big fan of that pace, whereas opposed to, it can be super intimidating to show up in a room with 100 or 200 or 300 people that you've never met before, and you know, worry about going home with COVID.
Yeah. I just before we go to Kendall, and I just wanted to remind people who are maybe just tuning in. So the question is, what opportunities do you see for digital church? And I would invite people to post your comments and your ideas too about what you think are the opportunities that are before us in the time that we're living in. So Kendall, what do you see as the opportunities?
I think, at least what I've seen in my areas, is everything that everybody's already said already. But I think community has probably been the biggest opportunity that I've seen, not just within churches themselves, but across denominations. Like, even just posting ideas in the comments about what they're doing, people are sharing, people are conversing, and everybody's desperate to try and figure out how to respond. But now we're not in necessarily the initial response. This is longevity. It's the both and. So how can we use this long term?
Right.
How can we use this to extend our reach? Like, I mean, I'm from Ontario, so my parents are probably watching this right now. Love them, but they check into stuff that I post. I do videos of myself making crafts for the children, and they're awkward, and that's fine, but they get shared. And so it's just, the community has become so much larger, but there's also the opportunity for really intentional community moments within your congregation. Because we do our services on Zoom, exactly like we're doing right now. So we have over 100 people represented in the Zoom calls. And so we have live interaction. We have people, you know, giving praise items, giving prayer requests. It's all real time. And it's just been so intentional and so deeply enriching for the church body to be able to still gather. So super great opportunities, and nobody has to look the same. And incorporating, I think, different elements from everybody has been super, you know, impactful and a great opportunity to share.
Yeah. I think one of the really refreshings about this time that we're in right now is that because we're all just learning and finding our way, there's really no experts, which is really refreshing, right? Like, we're all just trying to find our own way. Now, I'm still learning from people. Like, I watch different things and I'm learning from people, but nobody is really, you know, the gold standard to say, well, that's how you do it, right? So there's a certain amount of a feeling of liberation in that sometimes when I do get too hard on myself or too hard on our community, that we're not doing it just right. Like, there is no just right way to do it, right? So there's something really liberating about that. And I like what you're saying about, you know, that this is not just a short-term thing, this is the long-term thing. And so one of my real struggles, and maybe this will come up as we move into some of the other questions, one of my concerns for me personally and for a lot of my other colleagues is the sustainability, because I find that this takes, for me anyways, I don't know about anybody else, takes way more energy for me to prepare something for like something digital than it would something, you know, live in person. So I'm concerned about the sustainability of it. And I'm trying now even to get my head around, what's summer vacation going to look like for me?
Yeah, but listen, the thing to remember about that is it also lasts longer. So you pick your battles in that regard, right? So when you're deciding as to the conversation that you want to have, if you want to record it and put it out there and let it stand, or is it more something that you need to do in the moment? And that's sort of a decision that you make ahead of time, and the work then is not in vain either, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit now. So we've talked about the opportunities, and I agree with all of you. I think we're only limited in opportunities by our lack of creativity or energy or willingness to take risks and do something different. And what I've noticed in the first 6 or 7 weeks, there's been a lot of patting ourselves on the back of saying we're doing such a great job, which is all fine. We need that encouragement because for a lot of people, this is really new for them. But it feels like now we're at a turning point or an opportunity to go a little bit deeper in some of this stuff. So what do you see are some of the challenges when it comes to digital church? We've already mentioned a couple, but now is a time to go a bit more in depth to some of the challenges that you perceive, whether that's in your community, in your denomination, or just in the kind of wider church. So kind of a free for all now, whoever wants to go first.
I can
I
go.
think go for it.
I was just thinking some of the challenges, like some of them are practical challenges, like what technology best suits what I want to accomplish. So my congregation happens to like being highly interactive, like seeing their faces. So just a pre-recorded Sunday service wasn't going to work. So trying to figure out the logistics of the technology, that's a challenge. I've never paid so much attention to what's behind me. And lighting, like I go to sit. Yeah, see, you've got an awesome background. I knew I was doing church stuff, so I put out some of my godly play stuff for the background. But like paying attention to that kind of detail, making it seem like a worshipful kind of place when I'm recording from my living room. So like that's those are some of the challenges that I've been experiencing.
That's a really practical challenge. Yeah.
Those are really practical challenges. I think the long-term challenge I already mentioned is like, how do we, now that we've started doing this, how do we keep it going once we're allowed to be gathered in our sanctuary? We don't want to lose that online presence, that digital presence, and the people you can potentially reach there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Interesting too, because I guess there's a lot of church leadership that right now have got the questions of, this is what I want to do. What do I need to do it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yep. Jonathan, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I think that we've already talked about the fact that there's a lot of freedom and a lot of liberation that comes with the idea that none of us have a clue what we're doing. None of us know what we're supposed to be doing or how you kind of go with what works with what works for you. But one of the things that's also sort of bringing home for me is that there are some things that like we just don't know how some of the ways that we used to think about and talk about the church, we have no idea how much that is still sort of applicable to the world that we're in right now. And people sometimes will talk about, well, how do you measure attendance? Or should you even be measuring attendance when it's when it's online? So like for someone like, I mean, hearing Kendall and talking about 100 people plus multiple people in front of a device in a Zoom gathering. It's one thing to say. Okay, we know how many people are there on that. But so someone watches for 3 seconds what we're doing on Sunday morning because they're scrolling through and saying, "What's Jonathan doing now? Change the channel, keep moving." That's not, I'm not watching that. People will. I'd have to say something really offensive for people to get up and walk out of church. But all I need to do is just be boring on Sunday, and they will immediately look for someone else. They're going to Rob's church. They're going to the cathedral. They're going somewhere where they, and I don't even think it's a judgment on me. I think it's just the attention span that we've got when we're in the mind when we're in the mindset scrolling through Facebook and seeing what's going on. We're always looking to see what's next. If we're listening to, and I mean, and hearing John talking about long form podcasting and things like that, that's a different piece. I mean, people have incredible attention spans for listening to stuff, but when they've got themselves into the mindset of, I'm going to listen to this now, and I'm going to, if it takes an hour, I'm going to take an hour, or I'll jump back and forth or do or do things like that. So we don't know how to talk about attendance or anything like that. And Rob and I, we've had this conversation of whether we even need to be worrying about those numbers. One of the things that struck me yesterday evening, I was out, I get all these thoughts, like sometimes it's when I'm in the shower, when I'm, fussing in the backyard, doing yard work and things like that. There's a point yesterday that I thought, how much if I were to plant a church digitally online that had no physical building, it was a community gathering online, does it really matter what diocese I'm licensed in? Who cares? What I mean, some of these sort of questions around licensing and diocesan authority and and all that, does it really matter in the world that we're living in? And I don't think that we know the answers to these questions because we've never really had to think in those terms. And I don't even know how much we need to be worrying about those questions.
Yeah, and something that Jonathan just said, and we can follow this thread if everybody wants to, or we can go somewhere else, but listening to you talking about, people kind of like what I call the drive-by worship, right? Like, so you check into St. Michael's and you don't like, what St. Michael's is doing. So then you maybe hop over to Cochrane Street and see what's going on there, and on to the next one and to the next one. So I think one of the challenges is, dealing with the question of what is this digital worship doing to us? How is it forming us in the way that we worship? Like, is it changing the way that we worship? Because one of my concerns is that it's, and I don't know if it's turning us into this, but it's turning us into more consumers of worship and of church, right? And not participating. Like, worship is participatory. And my fear is that we're losing some of that in the digital medium. So I've been trying to encourage people, post your comments in the questions, or share the piece with each other in the comments, and trying to, bring that side of it out. But my fear is it's turning us into consumers. People can speak to that if you want, or we can go on to some other challenge that you see.
I mean, that's been the same question that's been on our mind as well. And I was in a denominational workshop like a week or so back, and they were just saying, how can we use social media and technological tools to make community and not consumers? Because that's what people need in this time. Again, we've had digital services for as long as I can even think back, and people could have tuned into those long before this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But now everybody's online, so now you get the idea of comparison and what are they doing and what's better, and we can just pick and choose. And C.S. Lewis, who talks about like send him all around town looking for the church that he wants and make him a connoisseur of churches till he finds one that he likes. We can pick and choose, and that's always been there. But I think trying to find tools like interacting in the comments, that's the big reason why we do ours over Zoom, is so we can have that face-to-face, because that means a lot for us. And that's what we found to be, intentional community. I know my parents back home, they do watch parties. I think there's a bunch of different ways to try and push that rather than just pushing content.
Yeah, good points. And just to pick up on some comments that a couple people have posted there now, and I'm kind of, putting a few different comments together about we talk about the digital church being this great way to connect people, but there's an exclusive side to technology as well, right? That not everybody has access to the digital world. And some people made mention of seniors, and then some other people said there's socioeconomic barriers that we live in this world in the West now where we just assume everybody has an internet connection, right? Or a data package on their phone. that's not the case. So maybe one of the challenges is, how do we ensure in the digital age, as we shift more into the digital world, because right now we're kind of in a hybrid, right? We're in an in-between, a both and. But how do we make sure that people don't get left behind, right? That we're building these more digital communities, but that people aren't left out, whether it's because of age or access or just ability to maneuver through the digital world. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
There's an interesting thing that I've started seeing, and I think that, I mean, we all kind of talk, and we're all sort of slightly afraid of the second wave of COVID-19. I'm kind of afraid of the second wave of people adapting to technology. I think that there are some people that I have been dealing with who I think that they might never admit it, but I think that when this whole shutdown started, I think they really thought, this is all going to be over by Easter. I don't need to learn how to do this. I don't need to learn how to use Zoom or anything like that, because why am I going to put myself through all that trouble for something I'm going to use for a couple of weeks, and then that's going to be that. And so while other people have been learning how to do this, that, and the other, and other people are getting more comfortable with that, I think that there are some people who are suddenly realizing, I actually do need to take this a little bit more seriously. And I think that some of them now are a little bit afraid. I don't want to be the one to say, I don't know how to use Zoom yet. I don't know how to do, I don't know how to do this. I find that, over the last little while, I've been answering a number of sort of technical questions about things that we were having. These are conversations that we were having 6-7 weeks ago when all of this was starting. And sometimes, oddly enough, sometimes it's the same people that I'm having those conversations with 6 weeks later, and sometimes it's a whole new batch of people, and I forget. Oh yeah, see, not everybody knows how to do this, or it's people are in different places in their in their learning cycles, or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been I think context has to do with a lot of things. So, my demographic is a fairly older congregation, and so not everybody does have internet, and the internet we have is sketchy sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I think the digital divide is real. Like I said, it's real, and it's not really just age. A friend of mine just posted a picture from her Paris Zoom coffee hour, where a 102-year-old joined Zoom. So my dad's 87. He uses technology pretty good. I have some people in their 40s and 50s who had intentionally decided that they're not going to do these things. So I do think we need to be intentional. And sometimes it's just really like, for us, like we started out calling people. So we just take the phone, put it down by the computer when the service comes and they listen, that's fine. Now we've taken an old iPad and put visuals on, videos on that, and we give it with a package of wipes, of course, and no contact delivery. And we let people have that, and they can watch it, and then they wipe it down, and we bring it to somebody else. So I mean, again, I think you just have to be imaginative, but we've got to stop assuming that everyone can access it, and assuming that those who aren't accessing it is about age, and some of it is about learning. Like, how many times have I said in the last few weeks? Now, see, if we had known a couple of weeks before, we could have had a few workshops. You could have all brought your iPads and your iPhones to church, and we would have showed you how to do all these things. So instead, you're on the phone.
And it says that our broadcast was interrupted.
Going on,
looks like we're back.
Pardon?
Now it looks like we're back.
Okay.
So I think we might have dropped off there for a while. So
even in town, they loses the internet.
Even in town.
It was Twillingate dragging us down.
I had to boot all my children off technology. Nope, I'm on Zoom. You can't.
Well, I mean, that's another challenge that we're facing too, right? Because as more people are moving online, it's more of a strain on the network for everybody. We noticed a couple of Sundays ago, I guess maybe it was just a lot of people getting up Sunday morning and tuning in for church in different places. And we had some trouble with our connection, and then the sound was off. And I know sometimes at home, I go to watch something on Netflix and the connection is horrible. So like even our infrastructure, our digital infrastructure is being challenged by some of this. And, you know, I think one of the conversations that as a society we're going to have, because we've been here in the West, we've been, you know, kind of, you know, straddling the fence on things like 5G technology and that kind of stuff. Once we get a bit further through this, I think people are going to be demanding more of that technology that allows, you know, quicker access and more convenient access for people, right? So this is going to be one of the byproducts that I think is going to come out of this whole pandemic. John, anything you want to share about challenges from where you see?
So two things, because I don't want to forget what you just said. Then, with not only just in the church, but in society as a whole now, what you're going to have is you're going to have a lot of people shifting towards home offices, right? Work from home, video chat, because they're all comfortable with it now. And I mean, I've been talking to real estate friends of mine, and nobody wants to be a commercial landlord right now because nobody knows what commercial real estate is going to look like in 2 years. Right. And that's something that the church has been dealing with as a whole for the last 10 years. Right. You see a lot of churches become venues or community centers or that sort of stuff. That's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. Right. Number one. I did want to piggyback to an idea, just because I thought about the fact that there's got to be a whole generation of people who normally get picked up by family every Sunday or every second Sunday to get brought out to church and be included in a part of that community, who right now, because everybody's trying to operate as minimally as possible in their lives. It just so happens that to the 6 people on this screen, the minimum that our lives includes something to do with church, right? But these are people to not be forgotten about, who are probably getting in their later days and are now missing out on a big part of community that was their lives, right? That's and you can't be there to physically address that or to comfort anybody right in this time. That's got to be super difficult.
Yeah, some of the feedback that I've gotten from some older parishioners, it's not even so much the church part of church, it's the social part of church.
Yeah,
it's coffee hour after church. That's
yeah.
what they're missing the most. And I think I've had more positive feedback because we do a Friday check-in, that it's just, you know, me, I make some announcements and people can post comments. And sometimes we talk about silly things like what you're watching on TV to get you through this, or what kind of things you're doing to, you know, what's your routines and those kinds of things. Sometimes we have more in-depth theological conversations, but I've gotten more positive feedback from that than I have about church, really, because I think what people are missing more than anything else is the community, right? The getting together, the being in the presence of other people, which I think is a big challenge in the digital age, in digital church. How do you create community? How, you know, how can you be present to each other? And today, when we were having a bit of a Facebook Messenger conversation, Joanne brought up about, you know, the incarnation. What does the incarnation look like in a digital world, right? So I don't know if anybody has anything to say, but that challenge, like the presence, the community challenge.
The biggest part of that is not necessarily having to build community, but either identifying and then harvesting the community that already exists. So for each denomination or each parish or each church, it may look different. It may depend on your demographic. It may depend on your parishioners. It may depend on, you know, your congregation. So the first, you know, if you're a good leader and you're engaged with your you know, congregation to know what it is that they're looking for, or then at least making strides to make sure they're included, it could look like anything. You know, the idea of doing morning worship as pre-recorded, because even now, like, what are you going to do? Last week I caught myself, you know, we watched our home church video that went live on Facebook, and then, you know, that was fine. It was all a bunch of community kids, but it was Sunday and I wanted some worship music. So I went to YouTube. You can't outdo Elevation or Hillsong or whatever, right?
Oh, that's up for debate.
Well, sure. But, you know, you can't do it in your basement with all this stuff, you know what I mean? But so then there's this balance of, with my congregation, are they more concerned about the authenticity and a little less concerned about the right notes being hit? Or are they more concerned with seeing a familiar face and hearing a song that they know and love? Right? That's up to you to decide, because you're not going to do a full-blown rock concert if that's not what your people are looking for. If they want Judy from church to sing whatever, you know what I mean, then give them that, because that's what they're used to and that's what makes them feel connected right now.
Yeah.
And I would say too, like when we talk about, I think people are too quick to sort of dismiss community that's built digitally as well. I mean, I think a lot of us are building on our pre-existent communities. And I think that's sort of the difference between the church going digital, which is the church using the digital, technology to build our own communities, in the digital church, which is a digital space that's building community in that space, right? That's, it's a little bit different. And there's been, Jonathan, lots, you talked about, there are some dioceses that have had, digital churches for a long time. And I think, if you're consistently tuning into somebody and listening to them and commenting on them and getting to know other people who comment on them, you can very well build a community. So I had said in my description of myself that I'm bi-stitchorial. I'm a crafter, and I only learned to knit in the last year or so. I learned to knit by YouTube, right? I feel connected, like I know these people who I've been watching their podcasts every week or every 2 weeks, right? I'm looking forward to the updates on their kids and your dogs and whatever, right? Like I feel part, and they often talk about it as a community, as the, the yarn community, and, the kinds of things they do for one another and supporting one another. So-and-so's sick, or so-and-so's having a hard time with their business. We need to buy some of their wool. Do you know what I mean? Like people respond. So I really was fascinated by that as I was drawn in more and more to that community. So I think, that this space can be very sacred and can be very community minded, and people build relationships, honest relationships. And we have that, that's a challenge for us, because we tend to think of community as having coffee with Aunt Susie after church or whatever. But it can look quite different than we think. And I see in some of the things I read posted that sometimes people dismiss that way too easily and quickly, and don't recognize its value. And I think it's incredibly valuable. We're connecting with some folk and building deep relationships. Some of the people who are connecting with us who aren't a normal part of our congregation are sharing their struggles with one another, are sharing, and asking for help, and finding help from one another. So I've been quite amazed. It's been a challenge, but it's been quite amazing to watch.
Kendallin, you mentioned that you're doing Zoom calls with like 100 people, like an actual church service. Here's what I want to know. Does it still feel like the same church?
Yes,
That's amazing.
It's different because church, you look at the back of everybody's heads. So at least once a week, somebody makes a joke of, "It's so good to see your faces and not the back of your head." And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Because like we have our worship teams, and the mic, we, pass it along between different families, and we have worship going live, and it's super cool. But I was worshiping and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, everybody can see my face and I can see everybody. That's so different, but it's so amazing because there's this connection in this relational space. We have virtual coffee time after the service. We all stay for like half an hour, catch up, everybody swaps how they're doing. It's been really cool. And I mean, I'm a millennial or a Gen Z, so this isn't really a surprise to me. But I think even I was caught off guard, just the amount of like authenticity and just genuine connection that happened, that I was like, this is profound. And I think even moving forward, one of the questions for community is, at least in Newfoundland, it's not going to happen really quickly, integrating back into normal. That won't happen probably ever. And so we need to figure out if this is a long-term thing. This could go on for the end of the year.
Mhm.
because people will be scared to come back together, particularly those who are vulnerable. So I think this is going to take so many different forms in the next however many months. Like, I think it'll just grow and expand from there.
There's a
Jonathan?
yes and comment that I wanted to throw onto Joanne's thing about the way that we build community online. That then the yes and is that yes, we can do that, and when those online communities, when they meet up in real life, holy cow, that is an amazing thing. I had been so privileged to be part of a really supportive group of young Anglican and Lutheran clergy from across the across the country, and every so often there have been conferences where we've all kind of met up in 2016. I was there. They first started in 2014 in Montreal. 2016 they were in Ottawa. 2018 they were in Regina, and now 2020 they were all supposed to be coming here. And I mean, the amount of support and the way that the online relationships are nurtured and fed and grow even deeper and deeper because you actually put real faces to all that is so huge. It's been one of the things that I have grieved the most, is having to pull the plug on that on that conference, and having to deny people that opportunity to meet up in person. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the in between, right? It's not either or, it's both and I think, because like listening to Jonathan describe that experience, our experience here at St. Mark's is, I think, like one of the biggest compliments that anybody has given me over the last 6 or 7 weeks is that they feel connected, right? They feel connected. And I think, wow, that's huge, because one of the big challenges in, digital media is people have trouble finding a connection. But I think there's something to be said for, you have a good sense of community in person, and then when it goes online, the connection stays. But it also happens the other way, like Jonathan was explaining. When you build the community online, but then when it transfers over to in person, it's that much more powerful. And I think if we can work on that, right? And I would hate for us to, once things go back to normal, whatever that's going to be, and we can go back to church and everybody can just come, I hope we don't just forsake the digital communities that we have started, because I think they can feed each other, right? So I hope that sense of community continues. One of the challenges that somebody just brought up online, and I was going to bring it up too, Tony Bidgood brings this up about the sacraments. We're all from different traditions here, but there is a sacramental element, I think, to all of our traditions, where we're doing at least communion and baptism in some form. What will sacraments look like in a digital church? What can they look like?
I mean, I can speak to that. We just did communion this past Sunday. And I mean, there's articles from different groups of people that have very differing opinions, and some say absolutely cannot do it online. And I know other faith traditions, they say yes, and denominations say yeah, go for it. So in our denomination, we determined that was something that we were going to do, because we are physically present in the Zoom meeting. It is not just a passive engagement with each other. We're genuinely physically present. And so we celebrated that. We had, our senior pastor led us through it, and everybody just had, a piece of bread and a cup of grape juice or cranberry juice, whatever they had in their homes. And it was an incredibly profound and powerful moment that we were still able to be the body at this, in this new way. It was really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else have anything to say about that?
I haven't done baptism yet, and I haven't even begun to imagine how you work that. But I'm sure there must be a way to figure it out. But in terms of communion, we did much the same as Kendall, and everybody, we were over Zoom, so we were gathered as a community together, and people had their bread and their grape juice or their cracker and milk or whatever they had and gathered together that way. We've had some discussion in our denomination about, can you still do communion if you're not in real time with each other? If it's being pre-recorded and going to YouTube, is that still, can you still do communion at that time if it's like premiering at 10 o'clock and people are going to have it at different times of the day? But I don't know. I can't imagine God's power is limited because you're not in real time with one another. I'm just saying.
Well, here's the thing. So what happens if it's invalid because it's not live? What happens if I get a phone call and I pause the live stream?
Yeah.
And when I come back, I've missed part of the service, or my internet kicks out, partway through, and I've got to watch, like I'm behind or things like that. Is it all still good? Like these are the kind of things that, like, in the Middle Ages they argued about this kind of thing, and we talk about it now. That, like, they're debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And I think that those conversations, we laugh at them now because they're stripped of the context that they're dealing with. Hundreds of years from now, people are going to look back and say, why were they worrying about, I mean, of all things in the midst of a pandemic, why were they even talking about this? It's because we don't know the context, and people are not necessarily going to get the context on that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Friend of mine's parents, they start with church in Newfoundland, and they kind of are serial church attenders and watch church all day long. And if there's communion, they get out their stuff and they have their communion, and they're not wondering about whether or not we're in real time with one another. They're gathering at the Lord's table with their brothers and sisters in whatever space and way that's possible. So yeah, I think you're right. I think in the long run, they're going to be going, you talked about what?
A couple of Sundays ago, I did that myself. I did Sunday morning with the guys in the Christian Motorcycle Club. And I was like, hey, I'm just going to throw this up here if anybody wants to jump in, because I was doing it anyway. And I was up in my spare room, and I cracked out the guitar, and I did a few, worship tunes that we were all comfortable. And it was great. Like, it was, I'm not going to do that every Sunday. I think that, there's a home church element. I think there's a community, whatever. But it was refreshing to have some sort of familiarity and authenticity in that moment, even though it was like, 7 people.
Yeah. I think if we're willing and open to be really intentional about this kind of conversation around sacraments, around communion and baptism, that this could really be a time of sacramental renewal, right? If we're really open and honest with each other and really engage in the conversation of, what do we really need to have communion? Right? Do you really need to have a priest there? What do you really need for baptism? Right? I think this could be a real time when we could really see a renewal or a revival of how we understand communion and baptism. And for some of us that come from a more liturgical tradition, things like confirmation and anointing and those kinds of things. Like, I think this could be a time that we look back and say, wow, we were really worried about all of this stuff, but it's really opened a lot of doors for us. It's really kind of thrown the gates open about how we understand ourselves.
And now for something completely different. I think the potential is actually also just as strong the other way, that we are going to recognize the center of the word, and become less focused on physicalities of the sacrament, or understand sacrament way more broadly, right? As an outward invisible sign of an inward invisible grace. So we'll begin to sort of see relationships as sacramental. We'll begin to see time as sacrament. You know what I mean? Like, and into things that, like, I have to tell you, and this is like confession time, right? We won't tell anybody, right? Okay.
There's nobody listening, so don't worry.
One of my biggest shocks for me, I mean, so in a week or so, I'm going to be ordained 30 years. One of the biggest shocks for me is how much I have not missed the sacrament of Eucharist. When I remember the Sunday when I sort of thought, like, okay, this is going to close soon, and I was presiding, I thought this is going to be my last Eucharist in community for a long time, and I was expecting, you know, like an emotional filling, but I was okay with that. And our diocese of Central Newfoundland has decided on a Eucharistic fast that while we can't gather physically together, that we won't be presiding at Eucharist on our own, or you know, in the 5 people, whatever, that are able to gather. And so that was like, well, okay, okay. I understood, and I agreed actually that that this was something we would do together. I wasn't really comfortable with me being able to do that if everybody couldn't do it anyway. And I perhaps for the last year or so have been rethinking, like, again, in Anglican terms, the whole movement post World War II of Eucharist becoming a weekly kind of thing, and wondering if we don't need to really spend more time in scripture and teaching, because people are not as scripturally knowledgeable, not as rooted, and probably some more evangelical traditions probably do that way better than we do in terms of Bible study and things like that. And I did see an article today, which I didn't get a chance to read, by a priest in England, sort of wondering, just sort of thinking out loud about, what if this goes the other way? What if this means that the Eucharist ceases to be the center of how we understand ourselves and what we do? I don't know the answer, but these are, as I think I said to Jonathan, we were texting back and forth. If there's any time to really take the time to think about how many angels dance on the head of a pin, why not now?
What else are we doing?
Figuring out digital media.
But to pick up on what Joanne was saying, Joanne, I think you and I are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is not that I hope we just come back with a better liturgical approach to communion. About, I hope that when I say a sacramental renewal, I hope we come through this and we realize that everything is sacramental. Mm-hmm. Every relationship, every person, every meal, every space is sacramental and holy and sacred. And so it's not so much that what we do in church is so important. It's only important because it points to other things, right? Our table here at St. Mark's is only important because it points us to the importance of other tables, right? The importance of being present with people, of feeding people who are hungry, of being present with people who are lonely. And baptism is the same thing, right? It's not that something magical happens in baptism. It's just that it points us to our need for acceptance and belonging and community. And that for us as Christians, we find that source in God, right? God is the one who welcomes us in baptism. God is the one who invites us to the meal of communion. And so if we can get it through our thick skulls, that every encounter we have around the table, we're encountering God, right? That every relationship we have, every conversation, every person we encounter, we're encountering God. That's what I mean by, and I think that realization can open up our minds and our hearts to what we do when we do get back together. Honestly, I think it's going to take a long time but I think there is a deep desire for everyone to gather in community, right? To be around the table. So I think that's something that speaks to everybody, right? Anybody else have any thoughts on that before we go into our last question? Because we're running out of time. Time flies when you're having fun.
I think there's a really interesting thing, and it was only just today that that it struck us. A lot of the times when we're talking about the sacraments, we've been talking about communion and how much can you preside at the Eucharist over the internet? Can bread and wine be consecrated over the internet? There's an interesting question though when it comes to baptism. Even in the Anglican and the Roman Catholic traditions, who would say that no, you need to be a priest in order to in order to preside at the Eucharist. There has always been this tradition that in the case of an emergency, any person present can baptize a baby, or baptize anybody who wants to be baptized. You don't need to be a priest. You don't need to be. I mean, frankly, any person present doesn't actually mean that you need to be baptized yourself in order to baptize another person. So the question I can't believe it took me this long to figure this out, to start thinking about this. If there was a family who had a baby that they wanted baptized, they say, I have no idea how long it's going to be before this pandemic lifts to the point that we can take the kid to church to be baptized and things like that. Why can't we baptize the baby at home? Why can't we even baptize in the context of a Zoom gathering with godparents and members of the congregation and all that sort of thing? And then when the time comes and we're able to gather again, why can't we have the child publicly received into the church? I baptized a baby years ago who was sickly and in possible danger of dying when the baby was born, and we dealt with that, and that was it was an emergency situation there. Is a global crisis, is a pandemic, is that not an emergency that makes room for baptizing babies? The really scary thing about this is somebody who makes a living baptizing babies and marrying couples and and things like that. If parents are going to baptize their own children and then bring them to church later on to be publicly received into the church, am I talking myself out of a job when I start talking along those lines? And then is there something beautiful about that when we recognize that God's grace is not just limited to the people in the collar who are dispensing the sacraments?
Yeah, there's something really unsettling about that to us professionals, but I think there's something really beautiful about it too. And that is exactly what I meant when I was talking about sacramental renewal or awakening, right? To go, further into the sacraments, right? To rediscover, I think, what they were originally intended to be, and maybe reinterpret them for our own time, because we're always doing that anyways, right? Dancing along the edge of what we have inherited and what is emerging, right? That's really what good tradition is, right? Is straddling that line.
And David Torval, Bishop David Torval, used to always say that really as clergy, our job is to bring about the reign of God and to work ourselves out of a job. So.
Was there anything anybody else wanted to share? It's nice to see Miriam back. She dropped out there for a second. I was going to make a joke. I was going to say, don't be alarmed. Miriam hasn't been taken in the digital rapture. It's just some technical difficulties. It's just a bad internet connection, but she's back. So was there anybody else that had something they want to share around like some of the challenges and that kind of stuff?
Well, let's throw one last log on the fire, seeing as I'm the only person here who doesn't make my living from being a clergy person. There's a difficult practicality there as well when it comes to giving, right, and tithing to the church, which has got to be a super difficult question, conversation, and can be kind of awkward, I would imagine. You know what I mean? Like nobody wants to go and pick up an envelope full of cash money from so and so down the road, but it's just, once again, these are not times that we were prepared for, right?
No, and it just goes to show you how slow we have been to embrace the digital shift, right? That for most people now, I read this somewhere, it may have been in the volume of essays that Joanne was a part of, where someone was saying, we live in a world now where probably the only time a person writes a check is to give it to the church. because we're one of the few places that will probably still, all we can accept is a check or cash. So we've been relatively slow in that digital shift, which is like the e-giving side of things. Now, some are better suited than others, but I'm positive there are some churches that are being hurt, just decimated financially in the last 7 weeks, because our model is people in a building, sitting in a pew, the plate coming around, and people putting an envelope in there with either a check or cash in it. And for most parishes, churches, that's how they get the lion's share of their revenue. Right. And so now, on top of everything else, we're scrambling to find our legs in, you know, in the digital world in terms of worship and Christian education and building community. But the other thing that's breathing down our necks is this financial piece. Right. So I don't know if anybody wanted to speak to that real quick. Not touching that one with a 10-foot pole.
I don't mind speaking to that a bit. We've been fortunate that we've been set up to receive donations online, but I think I've lost my internet connection again.
Nope, we can still hear you.
You can still hear me? Okay. Yeah. You're freezing up on me and I see the screen go, oh. Fairly sizable number of people in power, which has really been helpful. And we still have people mailing in checks, which has also been helpful. But we've got a combination of all of it going on, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, here at St. Mark's, we've been engaged in some form of e-giving, electronic giving, going back to the late 90s. So we had a bit of an advantage when all of this started, and we have multiple ways that people can give us money.
I think a big opportunity with this, though, is looking at moving forward, and whenever this ends, is what can we put in place now that we can still utilize down the road? It's not like, you know, Band-Aid solutions. This is the future. Like, I don't have a checkbook. I'll never have a checkbook. That's just not how I function. Yeah. But what can we put in place now? And I think even when we're looking at phasing and reopening, passing an offering plate is not a realistic thing to do in terms of safety. So again, what can we put in place, whether it's a debit terminal or, you know, e-transfer, like looking into those options for long-term solutions.
Yeah. And it can't be just one thing.
Oh my gosh, no, having.
Right?
Yeah.
The days of a one size fits all for anything, whether it's, you know, the way people give you money or the way you communicate with people or your social media platform or whatever, there's no one size fits all. There's no one way to do everything. Okay, so we're running short on time. So I wanted to end with, I guess, is more of a practical question. And so my question is this. What practical advice would you give to any church leader who may be struggling with digital ministry or wanting to take their digital ministry to the next level? Now, this could be things around equipment, platforms, just some, you know, basic, maybe even some things that you've learned over the last 6 or 7 weeks.
Don't be afraid to ask for help, number one, from anybody, including me. So if anybody wants to find me in the comments, I'm obviously a big tech dork and I can figure it out or at least help you. Number two, test your stuff. Find another Facebook page, you know, and just go on there and make sure that it's working, because even there's nothing funnier than, you know, obviously I'm a big music nerd, and the music store that I go to a lot went live on Facebook and their feed didn't have audio. Like, there's nothing more embarrassing than if you're an audio company who can't get audio live on Facebook, right? Don't do that. And then the third one that I was really impressed with this week was I had somebody in North Carolina shared their local church's live Facebook interaction, and it was with a theologian that I'm a huge fan of. So I would have never come across that interaction, but because it was on Facebook and it was Sunday morning and I was church hopping, right, like we were already talking about, I managed to watch an impromptu interview and conversation with, from a theologian that I have huge respect for, live in the moment. So the opportunities are endless. The challenges are almost seemingly endless as well. But if we're on the internet, everything is accessible. Everybody is accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. So get out there and make connections.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, to me, the biggest thing, my advice is partner. Like, so I'm doing Bible study with friend Nova Scotia, doing this with Rob. I emailed Jonathan, asked him, how did you get that sound thing going? I couldn't get it. You know what I mean? I've been partnering with all kinds of people, asking advice, doing things together, offering things together. I think that's the biggest, just ask. And don't it's like stretching yourself it is a stretch and it is vulnerable, but it's very rewarding. And if you got someone to hold your hand to it, it's easier.
Yep. Anybody else?
I'd say make good friends with Canva. It's a great tool for like even just developing your social media posts. But I've started using Canva to do little visual prayers for people. A great tool. And don't be afraid to try. Like, what's worse can happen? Give it a whirl. If it doesn't work, you don't do it again.
Yeah. Yep.
Technology doesn't hate you. People get this, this notion in their heads that, oh no, that computer, it doesn't like me. That's such foolishness. The technology is, at least yet, technology is not capable of hating you. It's not capable of, yet.
Yet.
That's later this year, right? That's but until until the machines get sentience, they're not going to hate you. There's something that is, you've got to almost got to think like a machine and think logically about this, that I'm doing something wrong that's making this happen in a predictable way. And if I can figure out what's going wrong, then I can figure out how to fix it. That's a huge thing. It's kind of about the attitude. There's a friend of mine said, don't assume, don't see this as the big challenge that I can't do this because I'm not technically minded. What you've got right now is you've got an opportunity to learn exciting new skills. And the other thing is, keep a sense of humor. Ask your phone, are you okay, when when it falls down under the bed, because you've got to be, you just got to be real about it, and you got to give yourself permission to mess up.
Yeah, I know someone in this group here now who apologizes to her computer when she does something wrong with it. One thing, just a comment that was made here by Sam Rose. Sam says the internet is an equalizer, and then he says bring on the new ecumenical movement. So there's really two things he's saying there that I really agree with, and one is, and this is one of the troubling things that I've noticed about the shift to digital church, is that it's still really clergy driven. And so, I would like to see, because the internet and digital media is such an equalizer, that it does provide an opportunity for not just us, professionals and experts to be engaged in worship and prayer and, creativity, that it's really open to everybody. And so I encourage everybody to make your mark in terms of digital church. Share your story. If you're a writer, write something. If you're an artist, a painter, draw something, paint something, and share it. If you're a musician, create music, right? And share it. Don't just fall back to a lot of the stuff that's out there now that's really prepackaged, and even some of the traditional stuff that we sing that we don't really believe anymore. Like, create your own stuff. Like, this is a great opportunity for the church to experience a new kind of renaissance in terms of creativity. And then the other thing he says about the ecumenical side of things, this is a testimony to that tonight, right? People from different traditions coming together to share from their experiences, as we shift towards the digital church. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do those kinds of things. And I would say, because we're in this for the long haul, like, this is not just going to be some blip on our screen. This is a long haul. I would encourage people to make some investments, right? Buy some equipment that will make you know, your life easier. Get yourself a good microphone, get a good camera. For God's sake, invest in a tripod, whether it's for your phone or, you know, for you, you know, but just put some money into it. We need to invest in the infrastructure to have a presence. You need to have the tools. As much as you want to have a comfortable pew for people to come and sit in, you want to have something that when people tune in, they don't say, well, who is that? I can't even make out what, right? You know, so try to put our best foot forward. Anybody want to have the last word before we go? Silence. Listen, can I just say that this was great, and I want to thank you so much for, you know, sharing your time and your expertise or lack of expertise with people who are tuning in. And for people who tuned in, hopefully you found this helpful, encouraging. Even if you got nothing else from this, that there are a bunch of goofballs out there who were willing to go online and just talk about how much they don't really know about this stuff. There's probably something really liberating about that too. So we hope that was helpful.
Again,
So,
I think maybe the last word needs to be that, you know, I mean, the goofballs here, all here gathering in keeping with that sort of talk about community that meets online and then, you know, meets up in real life. We all need to get together, like once the bars, the coffee shops, wherever open up, we need to meet up face to face. It's a good thing.
well, it's interesting you say that because, yeah, we'll go to Twillingate. When the idea behind the Open Table Collective was about getting people to come together, really in the context of a party, to eat and drink with each other, and in the process get to know each other, build relationships, and share some of this, you know, expertise and struggles with each other face to face. And we found it really hard to get it off the ground because everybody was so shagging busy. Now I think the digital platform is going to enable it to kind of take root and bloom, and then that maybe down the road, yeah, we are going to get together and we're going to have a party where we get together and, you know, talk face to face and get to know each other, not just this little group of 6 of us, but like the wider group, because Newfoundland too, we're so isolated, right? And we have this complex about experts, that we need to bring in experts from away to tell us how to do things right. There's a lot of expertise and creativity right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so part of the rationale behind the Open Table Collective is to tap into some of that expertise. So thanks for being with us, all of you, and have a great night. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. Let's do it again soon.
thank you.
God bless.
Right.